हरति हरति मनो ते वदनं हरति हरति मनो ते वदनं हरति हरति मनो ते वदनं सरसिजलोचनं विजितमन्मथमुखम्.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Indian History and Culture. This is in a past episode we spoke about the history of Indian temples and how it evolved. We spoke about the point that Indian temples are not a original idea of Hinduism, and neither was it a new idea of Hinduism. It evolved over time as the needs of people changed. In this episode we are going to be talking about the actual architecture of the various types of Indian temples and how they look and how can you distinguish. So one of the practical outcomes of this video would be that you will be able to look at a temple and determine its style and also appreciate its architecture a lot more. When I go to a temple, I see them. It's very grand and beautiful design, a lot of symmetry. These are things that strikes you when you actually go and visit a temple. But beyond that, I never knew any nuanced way of appreciating the architecture and design, and that was the original kind of thought that provoked me to read up a little more about the various aspects of the Indian temple architecture. So we're going to cut it into multiple parts. One is a very quick primer on how did the temple came about, and if you really want to go into a lot more detail, I have another 20-minute video in another part, in part one. But then we'll quickly go into what is the foundational philosophy around which the architecture of Indian temples picked up, and then some of the design principles that we use, and then go into different styles that originated and talk about the characteristics of different styles. I don't hope that this episode should shoot more than 20-25 minutes, so please stick around for that. But before we begin, I do intend to cover a lot more topics on Indian history and culture. So if you like this topic, please subscribe and click on the bell icon so that next time I publish another video, you get a ping on that by email or notification on your browser. So thanks for supporting and thanks for joining me. So just to get into the first part of the discussion today, mostly if you were to look at Hinduism was a mosaic of different principles and beliefs that kind of amalgamated into a philosophy. It is not a very well-defined monolithic religion. We don't have one single scripture to go after. We don't have one God to go, look up to. It's overlaid principles and theology, which is kind of mixed together. I'd look at that as it's more belief and way of life than anything else, and it's a philosophical concept which developed over time and it adapted quite a number of times over time. So initially, if you were to look at the Vedic period, and they were more nature deities. We were looking at Indra as a god of rain and thunder, Agni as a god of fire, Surya as a god of sun, and there were hundreds of such gods which are mostly nature gods, and we literally did not think about a house for the gods because we lived in that, in a world which is created by God. So the whole world was seen as a manifestation of it. So the way we connected with the gods were by doing fire rituals, which is called yagna or homa. I literally create a squarish pit, and then you create fire in it, and then you chant few mantras or invocations to the gods, and then make some offerings, and then you are done. You just clean it up and then go away. And this could be done everywhere and everywhere as well. But remember the shape of that particular pit that I talked about. It is a square, and it will come back again later when we are talking about the modern temple architecture as well. But then over a period of time, these rituals became a lot more complex and then elaborate, and therefore there were a class of people who actually were needed, specialists who would actually conduct those rituals, and it kind of started becoming a lot more complicated. And people, obviously, there was a reaction in the society towards some kind of innovation in this page. And as an innovation came few set of kind of a subsidiary religions called Shramana religion, which Buddhism and Jainism are two of the popular ones. There were more, but these two became very popular. At one point of time, Jainism was very popular throughout India, and then Buddhism later became very popular throughout India as well. But overall, around the time when Buddha died, even politically speaking, this was Chandragupta Maurya period, where Buddhism started gaining prominence. He became a Buddhist and he started promoting Buddhism. And just around the time when Buddha died, there was reliquaries, like we had Buddha's teeth and Buddha's hair and maybe some toes and fingernails and things like that. People started storing it, and they needed a place to house them. And Buddhism also had a concept of sangha, which means a community of Buddhists and Buddhist priests and monks who would stay in a place. So they needed a housing structure, and therefore Buddhism basically gave rise to an architecture of a place of worship, kind of a concept actually developed there. And as a reaction, it became very popular, and Hinduism started adopting such a mechanism, and Indian temples were an innovation which were born out of it. And if you were to look at the Indian temple, I'm sorry, I'm going to be referring to a lot of notes here, so pardon me when I'm looking between camera on this. So if you were to look at the Indian temple, most of the devotional worship as well as sculpture of gods and idols started coming around the 2nd and the 3rd centuries, maybe around minus 100 to plus 200 kind of era, where there were 3 cults which are god cults which became a lot more popular. One was the Shiva, cult of Shiva, then the cult of Vishnu, and there is a female god cult of Shakti or Kali or Durga, any of that. You would look at it. And you would start seeing that when temples started forming, obviously we had millions of gods earlier, all of them were nature gods. But now when you have to invest in building a temple, you can't build temples for millions of gods. So eventually, it naturally forced you to go invest more into fewer gods and fewer affiliated gods as well. So Shiva, Vishnu, and Kali or Durga, these temples started becoming, these followings as well as the patronage and these temples around them started becoming a lot more popular. So with that, I think the temple structure started evolving. We started making idols. We started creating visual images of gods as well during this time. But around the time, if you were to see around Buddhism structure was a donical structure. It is a big brick or stone masonry, and the shrines are inside this dome called chaityas, and then around this there were rectangular spaces for meditation and for monks to stay, and these were called viharas or sangramas. So these are various words that were being used. But during the time when Buddha passed away, soon after that, there were 8 stupas which were built, and the 9th one for each of the relics that we have of Buddha, and then there was a 9th one which actually held the bowl which held those relics as well. So they evolved from being a more dome-shaped hemispherical structure to a lot more over a period of time. As things got grander and grander, this dome started becoming more cylindrical, and then later more pyramidal structure, and that became the characteristic of the Hindu temples, where we would talk about it. It's called shikaras, and most of the temples we see are very pyramidal or cylindrical, tapering as it goes to the top. So this was the original structure, which then over a period of time it started growing vertically, as well as started growing horizontally as well. And then the temple started taking different hues, and different usages came around the temple structure. Like for example, in the south predominantly you will see that the temple structure is not just used for worship. It's a marketplace. You go to a temple, there are temple towns and temple cities as well. And you would see a lot of them in Rajasthan, even now in Rajasthan and some parts of Gujarat, and a lot of many parts of Tamil Nadu as well. For example, the town of Madurai was actually a temple town. The town of Tanjavur was a temple town, and Srirangam is another temple town. There are many temple towns which are there, where you will see that the temple is in the middle of the town. It's not because of any other reason, but the town itself grew around the temple, and you can still see marketplaces around the temple, and it kind of gives you a sense of how the temple became the epicenter of your, not just your religious life, but your commercial life and cultural life as well. Weddings were done in temples, and the festivals were conducted in temple, and the schools were around temples as well. So this is where how things have started growing. But let's go back to the architecture side of it, and it's primarily the design principle of a temple is based on what is called Vastu Purusha Mandala, and this is a architectural philosophy, design, all mixed together. It's got it's Vastu, it refers to the physical environment. Purusha refers to the energy that you can focus in a physical environment, and Mandala refers to the plan or the architecture of it. So Vastu Purusha Mandala is very well known. It's kind of a feng shui where even for you apply Vastu principles even when you're building your house, because there is a belief that energy flows through in a certain form, and if it is conducive in terms of how your house is built, then it helps you. So temple is purely based on Vastu Purusha Mandala. But then if you go to look at it, it's a very prescribed plan, and the whole idea is that there is a single focal point, and which is a source of the energy, and it spreads. And the way it spreads is it spreads uniformly. Hence the structure, shape. There is a lot of symmetry and uniformity which is needed to kind of maintain that, and that's kind of taken care of it. So we had many books or many principles and shastras, what we call as the shastras, which are written around it. There is a Shilpa Shastra, which is a treatise on the whole architecture of the statues and the imagery, and there is a Vastu Shastra, which is around the building, the principles around how you can build, what should be placed where, and etc. and all that. These were there for millennia, at least it goes into few hundred BCs, but by 6th century it started getting codified in the form of books, and we still have access to those books. Even cities are planned based on that as well. Finally, I want to focus on this word mandala in the Vastu Purusha Mandala. The mandala is nothing but a square, and square is considered as a very sacred and very pure shape in Hindu philosophy. And like I said, if you remember a few minutes ago, I said even the yoga and yajna are made out of a square pit, and I said remember this shape because square has a very unique and very special meaning in the Hindu philosophy. So and I'll explain why as well. So and the second shape that Hindus in Hindu philosophy has got a lot of prominence is a circle. And this is it. There is everything about Hindu temple or anything, any philosophy that you're talking about revolves around square and a circle. And clearly a square is a lot more prominent than a circle. Circle is kind of a means or used within a square, but square is the main form. There are kind of various attribution. They say number 4 is a good number. Then we have 4 Vedas, and then there are 4 gods. There are 4 eras and yugas, and four phases of life. And there is three is also a special number, by the way. But from a architecture and design perspective, square is considered this. So now there is a lot of fractal geometry or fractal patterning in the architecture. So everything that you see in terms of building a temple, how intricate and very unique the structure looks like, they're all born out of a square, and everything can be measured in terms of a square. They typically start with a square, then they cut it into 4 squares or 9 squares or 16 squares or 25 squares or 36 squares, and then you form shapes. Even a circle, even if a temple which looks like a circle, the shikara which looks like a circle, it's not a circle. It's many squares kind of inscribed, and it kind of gives you the appearance of a circle. So the grid in the squares are the basic structure from which every other shape is derived. You think of a triangle, you think of a circle, you think of a hexagon, you think of an octagon. They are all derived out of the basic square as a shape, and that's how much the Indian geometry as well as the architecture places emphasis on square. In fact, they give many names to a square. For example, a single square is called Sakala Mandala. I mean, mandala stands for square. And a four boxes is called Pechaka Mandala. And a 9 box is called Pita Mandala. And a 16 boxes is called Mahapita Mandala. And then there is like names which just goes on and on. There is Mandukya Chandita Mandala. There is Paramasaikya Mandala. It just keeps going on and on. And then we believe that square is so symmetrical that the center of the square is the source of energy, it can hold the energy, and it radiates radially to all parts equally, and that's the whole idea of doing it. So when you are looking at constructing a temple, you start with a square, and the middle of the square is where you keep your guards statue, and then the rest of it is all formed out of squares which are kind of emanating and then going out in all directions, and then you kind of chip away certain parts of it, and then you also build squares on the third dimension, and that's how it gets started. Very fascinating. I didn't know this, by the way. I thought there would be a lot more geometry involved. But I was fascinated to see that every temple is built out of a bunch of squares, and this I thought was an important point to drive home one more time. And if you were to look at the temple architecture, we started building with wood and bricks and things like that. The initial set of temples didn't last long. Obviously, wood doesn't last long, and bricks don't last long; they crumble easily. But then by a Gupta temple, the architecture started becoming grander and grander, and it started taking more formal plans and formal styles. And we started using granite, we started using soapstones and sandstones, and which still last for thousands of years. Those temples still last, and it's fascinating to see that how long they can last. So Gupta period was a time when Indian temple architecture started becoming much more formalized. And as they got formalized, there are few forms you can start seeing the patterns becoming consistent. Number one, the place where you keep the god is called Garbhagruha. Garbha means womb and Griha means house. It's a chamber of the womb. This is why it's called Garbhagruha. And then you would see that on top of Garbhagruha you have this conical or a pyramidal structure which is called Shikara. And the Shikara typically is kind of stands for the Mount Meru, which is a mythical mountain that Vedas talk about, which is considered as a sacred mountain. So literally you're creating the entire foundation of the cosmos there. And then in front of the Garbhagruha is like where people stand and then look at the god. This is what is called Mandapa. And then there is the temple itself is raised on a platform. It's called Pita, and the front of the temple where the entrance is, it's called Gopuram. So these are few elements that started showing up consistently, and a lot of more formalization actually happened. And there are a few more. You find Antarala. Antarala is between the chamber where the god is, and the Mantapa where people are entering to the god. The in between vestibule is called Antarala, and then you have Amalaka, which is on top of the Shikara. You have a round shaped, a pizza shaped structure with ribs on it, and that's called Amalaka. And you started seeing these type of more and more formal structures, and then started kind of becoming a lot more formal. Initially, these temples were stone cut temples, rather rock cut temples, meaning you literally go to a mountain and then you chip off the mountain to build these structures. And then later, that only allowed you so much flexibility, but it did not require too much of engineering prowess. But later, as our engineering prowess started getting better and better, we started chipping off granites from the stones, and we transported big blocks of them, maybe by we cut using a very simple method where we make small holes in the granite, and then we put a wood, and then we soak the wood with water, and as the wood starts to expand, and you kind of keep these pegs along a line, and the expanding pegs will put pressure, which creates a crack in the wood, and that's how you kind of create blocks. You can actually see many of the granite blocks lying around the temple. You can see those, the markings for the pegs. And then you use, use logs to, circular logs to transport it. Maybe using elephants to kind of transport to the place where you build it. And then you started building freestanding temples. And most of the Indian temples, if you go to see, do not use any binding material. So if you go to see, the temple is just stacked up piles of granite stones. There is a little bit of mortar in between, but it really doesn't hold. You see the size, and you see the the mortar or the sealants. Sealants are not really holding. It's just to kind of cover up the cracks there or crevices there, but they're not holding the temple. The whole structure of the temple is the forces going from top to bottom. If you go to see Indian temples, unlike a Western architecture, it never radiates the forces, the weight, horizontally. It always is pushing it towards the bottom. I mean, I'm talking about 1,000-year-old temples. I'm not talking about the modern temples. Modern temples obviously have been influenced a lot more by the Western architecture, and even Arabic architecture, where you also use more sideways dissipation of forces. But if you were to look at the temple between 280 to about 1,280, literally they are piles of stones kept on top of each other. And the engineering side of it is that the forces are only going down, and they are loosely held. So that's why they could survive for such a long time, despite, I'm sure there were many earthquakes and other forces, but they never fall down. They are still very, very stable. So coming back to the different kind of styles that different architectural styles, there were two major categories or two different styles that emerged. One is called Nagara style, which is the North Indian style. So, and the second is the Dravida style, which is a South Indian style. Overall, if you look at any temple, it would either follow a Nagara style or it would follow a Dravida style. They're very distinct. But there are sub-styles as well. Like, for example, Orissa has beautiful, it has its own style, which is kind of a derivative of Nagara style, but a little distinct. During the Kalinga dynasty, there was a style that emerged there. And on the western side of India, you have a Solanki style, which is again emerged in that region. It again follows a Nagara style as well. And you will see that Kerala has its own style, Himalaya has its own style. But overall, if you go to look at the principles, principal designs, it is a Nagara style in the north, north of the Vindhyas, and then south of Vindhyas you would see Dravida style. And where north and south are meeting, there has been a confluence of hybrid style which also emerged, which is also called Vesara style. But Vesara style had primarily ingredients from both Nagara and Dravida as well. So I would not go into Vesara too much in detail, but we will talk about what's what distinguishes Nagara from Dravida style in this section. If you were to look at this, all of them have this Garbhagruha, there is a Mantapa, there is a Shikara, and then there is a compound, and there is a Gopuram, which is the gateway. Literally, these principles are common to both these styles. But if you were to look at the structure of Shikara, is one which is very distinct. So just by looking from outside, you can see that in the Nagara style, the Shikara is more conical and which kind of tapers to the top. Whereas if you were to look at the South Indian Dravida style, it's more storied. There are stories which again tapers to the top, but there are stories which actually taper to the top. Very distinct, and you'll see in these pictures that that's how it is. And the one where if you look at Nagara style, you will find facets. So it's not a smooth, straight the Shikara, but you have a straight line, and then there is a projection coming out, and there is a smaller projection coming out, and then there is some more smaller projection coming out, and then these projections also taper as it goes to the top of the Shikara, and this is how it's primarily mainly distinguished. And the other interesting distinction is that over time, in the North Indian Nagara style, the evolution started going more towards grander and taller Shikaras, whereas in the South Indian style, the Shikara, which is holding the main deity, never rised. It stayed at a certain height, and they didn't build taller Shikaras. There were exceptions, obviously, but overall, if you see the South Indian temples, the Shikara of the main deity is actually small. What got grander is the entrance Gopuram. Gopuram is the compound wall, and in the compound wall, they built massive gateways, and the gateways were much more grander, much more bigger compared to the main deity's Shikara. In most of the South Indian style. So you can tell the difference. Gopuram is not a key feature in the Nagara style. Some of them have, definitely, but they are not as grand. They always, Gopuram is smaller, and the Shikara, which is the conical or the pyramidal structure going to the top of the temple, is the principal feature of a Nagara style temple. So over time, what we have seen is that the temples became a magnet for not just religious reason, but they brought the society together, and there were cultural activities, educational activities, and economic activities. Were centered around the temple. You can still see markets around many of the temple towns, and particularly when you go to Rajasthan and Gujarat, you see that, and then you see a lot of it in South India. There are still vibrant temple towns in South India. So it is actually, they were setting the tone of progress. They were setting the tone of the cultural mindset and shaping them as well, because they never stayed static. Temples were actually much more progressive in the way that they would look at how society needs to respond to things around you. As world changed, temples changed, and with temples the mindset changed, and with mindsets the society changed as well. It's kind of only after, let's say, the colonization that we start seeing the diminishing role of temples, because we started kind of taking the Western principles of keeping the church and the state separate. It was never that connected in India. For example, like Pope was the head of a state, we didn't have a priest as a head of the state in India, but clearly political patronage really helped some of the sects to kind of grow. For example, if a king was a Shaiva king, then you would see a lot of Shaiva temples and patronage for what out of that. But mostly Hinduism was much more inclusive. You saw Shaiva, Vaishnavite, and other sects, and Buddhism and Jainism collaborating, co-living, coexisting during this time. So fabric was more mosaic fabric in India. Unfortunately, because of the Western concept, we also went down the path of segregating these two spheres that shapes our mindset, shapes our cultural mindset, shapes our morality and everything else. And today we kind of see that most of the institutions that temples were setting standards for kind of go away to independent institutions. There are pros and cons to it. I'm not trying to make it political right now, but with that, there is a decline of looking at temples primarily from a religious perspective. So, and then you are starting to see more temples go beyond just being a place of religion to being a place of spirituality, a place of philosophy, and that's the evolution that we see today in India across the world. I do travel to see temples just for their architectural splendor more than anything else. And second is when you walk around these huge complexes, the grandness of the vision, the grandness of the scale really inspires me, as well as the ambiance within the temple is very peaceful, so I kind of enjoy that. I'm not a very religious person, but I go there to admire how our temple architecture, which is clearly makes us all very proud. I hope this segment has helped you understand some of the nuances of the temple architecture. Frankly, I'm not satisfied with the how much I covered in this segment. I have enough to talk about for, let's say, maybe half a day, 4 hours or so. There is so much more to talk about if you go down to the nuances of this further. But I know I need to stop at 20-25 minutes. Therefore I'm stopping at this point of time. Maybe I'll do another episode if time permits, if I have enough inspiration to do this, or maybe I will move on to a new topic. So please do subscribe and watch this space. I will, as I cover different topics around Indian history and culture. Thanks for joining me.